Well, greetings, test takers. This is Dean Tenney coming to you from my studio here in fabulous Las Vegas. We do accept lecture requests. So, lectures I think are going to be popular, sometimes are not, you know, and lectures that people recommend, I think, and they end up being very, very popular. Usually, when there's a requested lecture, what I do is a little carve out of the topic so that it comes in at 10 or 15 minutes rather than coming in longer than that. This actually came from a social media. You can find me on Facebook, Series 7 Guru. There's a Facebook page. There's a YouTube channel. You can find me either Dean Tenney is the name of the channel or Series 7 Guru. That'll pop up the channel. And then we have some Reddit communities. And this request comes from our Series 66 Reddit community. A lot of times in social media, somebody will have a post and they'll ask a question. It doesn't really lend itself to, a couple of sentences or a post. And so what I then do is say, hey, I'm more than happy to answer that. But, does briefly mean 10, 15 minutes? If so, I'll make a little video and provide that to you. So this question was power or jurisdiction of the state administrator. And that's on all of the NASA exams. So here's a brief overview of the jurisdiction of the state administrator. I always think of the NASA exams as kind of like a play, and there's a cast of characters. And the most important member of the cast is the state administrator. I always joke the SEC is God and state administrators think they are. So there's these 50 demigods running around. By the way, they provide the same thing in general as the SEC. They're trying to protect retail investors. That's very key on these exams. Retail investors who are residents or citizens of their state. Okay, so let's get started on jurisdiction of the state administrator. The first kind of thing we need to know about this thing about jurisdiction, and now it looks like my slides aren't moving. Hold on. There we go. Is jurisdiction sometimes has to do with offers or sales. And, the test is very legalese. And so an offer is an attempt to solicit a purchase, attempt to dispose of a security for value, keyword value. There's a lot of very important pivot words on NASA exams. And so value, compensation, consideration, those are words to be looking for. Sometimes they try and make you sound, well, it's not like much, like nominal. No, there's compensation, no compensation. That's kind of a key pivot on questions a lot of times. Sale of rights, warrants, or convertible securities is an offer of the underlying stock. Here, what we're saying is a sale is an offer accepted. So an offer accepted becomes a sale. I think of as a transaction. And is the offer or the sale, the transaction, subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator? So transfer value, bonus of warrants or stock. Bonus, again, means compensation. And if there's compensation or consideration. Now, be very careful on your NASA exam. It's a giant reading test. And so I always say RTFQ, read the full question, and also read the full answer set. So, there's a distinction here between a purported gift, don't you love that word, purported gift, of assessable stock. Keyword is assessable. Assessable stock is where the corporation can make a mandatory capital call. And what the state administrator thinks is if I make a gift to you of assessable stock, I may indeed actually be, getting rid of a liability because maybe I know there's a capital call coming. So be careful. Non-assessable is a gift, and gifts are not subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. So 3 letters. If this would have said purported gift of non-assessable stock, then it is not a transaction subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. This says assessable stock. So make sure you're reading carefully when you're taking your exam. Again, I don't know why this thing, I'm having troubles moving my slides. So here again are transactions or sales that do not fall subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. Keyword non. I put that in bold letters there for you, right? So a gift of non-assessable stock is not subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. A stock dividend or stock split if no payment. So when Apple splits or Tesla splits or Google splits their stock, they don't need to register that new stock with the state administrator because that's not considered a transaction or a sale subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. A bona fide pledge. So if I'm a lender and I accept securities from you, Bona fide is Latin for good faith. So in good faith, I, a lender, accept securities from you. And then, that's the collateral, and you don't fulfill your responsibility. I can liquidate those securities, the collateral, and not worry about whether I'm subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator in terms of those securities being registered or not, because that is, again, not something that is subject to the jurisdiction of the state administrator. I would think here like a margin account where the stock's in the street name. It doesn't have to be a margin account. It could be any bona fide loan, good faith loan that is accepting securities as collateral. An act resulting from an approved merger or business reorganization. So here what we mean in terms of a merger is, for example, Disney takes down its shelf. It has securities that's registered with the SEC, but hasn't issued, and then they issue that stock to make the acquisition of Fox. Again, those Disney shares don't need to be registered on the Uniform Securities Act with the state administrator. The state administrator doesn't have jurisdiction over that act resulting from that approved merger or business reorganization. So jurisdiction, the state administrator does have jurisdiction over offers or sales, right, that originated in the administrator state, was directed to the administrator state, or was accepted in the administrator state. So I'm coming to you from Nevada. And so I make an offer to somebody in California. So the offer originated in Nevada. It was directed to California. And the client answers the phone in California and says, Dean, I appreciate that offer. I do want to kind of think about that. Why don't you give me a couple of days to think about it. Call me 48 hours and I'll give you my decision. So I call back the client 48 hours later, and I hear some background noise. I say, hey, what's up? They say, Dean, I took a little trip up to Oregon, checking out some breweries and wineries. And I say, oh, you're in Oregon now? He goes, yeah. He says, hey, listen, go ahead with the investment. I'm accepting the offer. So that was accepted in Oregon. So now Oregon has jurisdiction. So in my example, the offer originated in Nevada. It was directed to California. It was accepted in Oregon. Now, be careful, ladies and gentlemen. I would suggest that what you might want to do is put your state in there and give these, states, because on the test they have state A, state B. I think it's easier you just put the states, substitute your state and contiguous states in terms of helping drain the swamp in terms of what's going on. Anyway, so customer says, Dean, my family office is in North Dakota. That's where I take care of most of my, investments and transactions. My family office in Bismarck, North Dakota. And so I'll have my family office send you a cashier's check for the investment drawn on my family office bank account in North Dakota. North Dakota does not have jurisdiction. So it doesn't matter where the financial institution is that the check was drawn on. I say, wonderful, I'll be looking for the check. I'll say, listen, the transfer agent is in Colorado. And this is one of those old-fashioned investments where we actually do have physical stock certificates, evidence of your ownership in the, corporation, the offer you just accepted. And so be looking for the certificates to be delivered to you at your address there in California. You could be looking for, it's going to come from Colorado. Colorado has no jurisdiction. It doesn't matter that the transfer agent in this example, where the certificates are being mailed from, is in Colorado. So in my example, we had 5 states: Nevada, California, Oregon, North Dakota, and Colorado. The 3 state administrators that have jurisdiction are Nevada, where the offer originated, California, where it was directed, and Oregon, where it was accepted. North Dakota, the check was mailed from North Dakota, no jurisdiction. The certificates were mailed from Colorado, no jurisdiction. Actions of the administrator. The administrator is responsible for enforcement of all anti-fraud provisions, as well as violations of the Uniform Securities Act. Now, be careful here. A lot of people get hung up on, not realizing there is jurisdiction or enforcement that the administrator doesn't have if we're not talking about the Uniform Securities Act template. What you're getting tested on is a template, and then states have their own versions of this. But, remember that we have the National Securities Market Improvement Act, which established what do we call federally covered investment advisors and federally covered securities. So just be careful that you're not saying that the state administrator has jurisdiction, for example, on net worth requirements for investment advisors. No. Net worth requirements for federally covered investment advisors would be covered by the SEC. You know, that 10 or 35 grand would be for states. So they do have the enforcement for the Uniform Securities Act, the 10 grand or the 35 grand. But if I'm a federally covered investment advisor, they do not. Right? I don't register as a federally covered investment with state. Be careful, for example, if it's a broker dealer and they're asking about net capital standards. You know, the administrator doesn't have authority to, you know, tell a broker dealer that's registered with the SEC that they have to have a net capital or net worth standard higher than what the SEC requires. So just be careful when you're reading questions. Now, obviously, the state administrator is more important because NASA is the one asking you to take this exam. So they can issue cease and desist orders with or without a prior hearing, so without due process. If they issue a cease and desist order and you ignore it, the state administrator can apply to the court for an injunction. You know, that's not good. They're going to go tell the judge that you're ignoring the administrator's orders. So summary orders to postpone or suspend until final determination is reached can be done with no prior notice or hearing. And again, this is the state administrator denying the person. Remember, there's two types of persons: unnatural persons. Unnatural persons are broker dealers, investment advisors, issuers. They're not living, breathing human beings walking planet Earth. And then persons, that would be you, natural persons, are living, breathing human beings walking planet Earth. The two that are big for you on the exam as natural persons are agents of the broker dealer and investment advisor representatives of the investment advisor firm. And the two biggest unnatural persons for you are, again, the broker dealer and the investment advisor. Now, remember, you also get tested on knowing what's not a person. Somebody now deceased, minors, somebody mentally incompetent, right? Now, if the state administrator takes action with no prior notice or hearing, they must hold a hearing within 15 days of a written request. They can investigate and subpoena in any state where there's a registration. So if they have there's a registration in the state of Nevada, whether it be what we just talked about, whether it's, you know, the natural, unnatural person, they can certainly do that. So it's not whether or not the firm has an office in the state, it's about registration. They can deny, suspend, or revoke a registration if it's in the public interest and, right? So we're talking about jurisdiction, power, right? It's all about power. I always joke the state administrators are typically attorneys, and they would make a lot more in private practice than they make being a state administrator. But what they don't get in, you know, money, they get in power instead, right? And usually this is a ladder of offices. They plan on doing other things besides being state administrator, right? Start with being a state administrator, then, you know, maybe a congressman, then maybe a governor, then a senator, and then maybe vice president, for example. So you make a file a false and misleading application, any felony or securities related misdemeanor conviction, willful violation. That means you actually knew the rules and chose to break them. You're under a court injunction or administrative order. There's been disciplinary action by other securities authorities. You're engaged in dishonest and unethical business practices like selling dividends or breakpoint sales or opening up a fictitious accounts, front running, you know, those kind of things. Firm's failure to supervise employees, failure to pay your fees, insolvency. You know, it means you can't meet your obligations financially. The applicant is not qualified on the basis of such factors as training, experience, and knowledge of the securities business. Be careful about the distinction between number 10 here and number 11. So, you know, this is your, you know, doing business in a product, and, you know, there's been lots of complaints in the state, and the state administrator says, listen, you know, I don't think your reps actually understand this product because I'm getting all kinds of complaints. You know, so I don't want you selling that anymore in my state, or I don't want you, I want you to take action, remediation to make sure they're properly, you know, qualified to sell these products. And then remember, the administrator can't do this just solely on the basis of lack of experience, because otherwise nobody could do business, right? So, yeah, what we're saying here is they can't, when you pass your 63 or 65 or 66, or your 6 or 7 say you're not properly qualified. No, everybody's got to start somewhere. Securities registrations, they can deny, suspend, or revoke a registration of a security if it's in the public interest and the registration statement is inaccurate, it's misleading or incomplete, an officer of the issuer has been convicted of a securities-related crime, the security is subject to a court injunction, the offering is deemed to be fraudulent. The offering expenses or promoter's fees are excessive or unreasonable. Again, we're pretty subjective, but it's kind of like what the Supreme Court said about pornography. They said they don't have a definition. They just know it when they see it. And the state administrator sometimes will look at the offering expenses and promoter's fee and say, listen, I think you could do better. So though the registration has been revoked by the administrator of another state, it is called the North American Securities Administrator Association. Final order of the administrator, they have to give you appropriate prior notice. They have to give you an opportunity for a hearing. And then it makes sense they have to give written findings of fact and conclusions of law, because if you want to litigate or do that, it's kind of hard to litigate if you don't actually know what you're being held accountable for, right? So the state administrator has to provide written findings and facts of conclusions of law. Cancellation of a registration can be done on a non-punitive basis or punitive. Punitive means you're being punished. Non-punitive means you're not being punished. The state administrator is canceling the registration because the registrant has ceased to do business. That means non-punitive, not being punished, just, you're not doing business any longer. The registrant is deceased. The registrant has been declared mentally incompetent. The administrator retains jurisdiction for 1 year. So, if you're no longer have a registration that's active with the state administrator, jurisdictional retention, don't you love that word? Means that, they're supposed to be able to call you and you're supposed to pretend, or I shouldn't say pretend, they'd be on if I said pretend. You're supposed to respond as if you were still in the business. So that's called jurisdictional retention. So, after a year, I can say, listen, I'm not in the business any longer. Rights of recovery. So again, we're talking about the power, jurisdiction of the state administrator. If you're a buyer of a security, and there's this transaction, the sale is subject to the jurisdiction, and it wasn't done right. Sometimes we say it wasn't properly blue skied. Blue sky are kind of the catchphrase for what we're talking about. That's why there's always a sign that says leaving state A, entering state B. And so I say, hey, listen, I blew it. I didn't get this blue sky in the state. And so, I'm offering you the right of rescission. You can get back your principal and you can get interest, and we'll pay your cost fees. Now, if it's an investment advisory client, you can get back your advisory fees, the losses on the recommendations, plus any legal fees, minus any interest income you have received. A right of rescission, as I just mentioned, has 30 days notice. So what I say is you have 30 days to decide whether you want to rescind the sale, the transaction, or whether you want to keep the investment. Now, we know you're probably going to say, let me think about it. And if 30 days, the investment is worth more than your principal and interest, you're probably going to say, I think I'll just keep the investment. If you accept the right of rescission, you decide you're not rescinding and you can't sue. Or if we do rescind the sale, you can't sue. The statute of limitations is 2 years of discovery or 3 years of violations, whichever occurs first. The criminal penalties under the Uniform Securities Act is a fine of up to $5,000, jail up to 3 years or both. The statute of limitation for criminal penalties is 5 years, and you have 60 days to appeal a final order. Okay, well, I hope you found that helpful. As a carve out, I will post this. And again, this is a requested lecture. If you have a requested lecture, just send it my way, and I'm more than happy to try and create something for you. Remember, inch by inch, your NASA exam is a cinch. Yard by yard, NASA exams are hard.